Hello, I am Dre. I'm a customer success engineer at Moveworks, and I'll be our host for today's Creator Studio weekly webinar session. Today, we're going to be discussing Coupa purchase request approvals, and then next week, we're going to be sort of an exciting new topic, but building on the new Moveworks Agentic Automation Engine. So, highly recommend coming to that next week's session. But I think today's will be good too. So let's go ahead and jump into today's session, and then we can spend some time talking about the content, basically about purchase request approvals in Coupa. I'll share some sort of follow-up resources that you can use to onboard to Creator Studio if you're new to this. And then finally, we'll open things up to a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section in Zoom or in the chat if you have access to that. And we will get to those during the Q&A. So let's go ahead and jump into Coupa purchase request approvals. I want to start by just sharing the API that we're going to be building with today. So I'm going to go ahead and go over here to the Coupa API documentation, compass.coupa.com, and we're going to be building using this approvals API. So just some quick overview of what we'll be able to accomplish using this API. We are able to approve, hold, index, reject, show, or update approvals. So of course, the first part of this use case, we will get approvals. Now we're actually going to do so using this get API call just to get as many approvals as we can for our user. And then finally, we will, the demo today is just going to do this part, but then we'll talk about how you would then approve or deny. So let's go ahead and go back to this. Okay. So this is the broad user experience that we want to build, right? So the user comes to the bot and says, what Coupa approvals do I have pending? Or what approvals do I have pending? We then need to search the approvals using the get approvals API call using the approver ID. So right off the bat, I'm thinking we need to go ahead and set up user ingestion for approver ID from Coupa. So a couple of ways to do this, but ultimately it's going to be unique to your specific environment. So what I would recommend is if you are interested in building this and you're trying to understand how best to incorporate the approver ID for your users, then I would say, contact your CS team. But broadly, you can import that using a connector and then include that in your user proto. So then once we have that, we can make our API call and get back a list of approvals that are pending our approval. So here's a high-level architecture diagram. Again, we want a user to come to the bot and ask the question, can you show me my approvals for this version of the use case? And that will then initiate the get approvals API call. Once we get back that data, we have sort of two options for how we would want to go about approving the approval. One would be a second queries use case, potentially, where we say we want to approve and then some, approval ID that we've gotten back recently. And that would allow us to then post an approval API call to Coupa using the approval ID. Alternatively, we can use a follow-up action. My guess is this will probably be the best option because then you can say, okay, now that you've got a list of approvals, maybe you want to find out more information about one, so you drill into it, and then the bot should be able to offer you the option to approve or deny that approval. So going back to the API documentation very quickly, just wanted to mention that the approver ID will be the field that we are filtering on, and that just gets added to the API call. Again, we need to ingest the user's approver ID, which is the Coupa user ID, in order for this to work. So again, contact your CS team on that one. Okay, and then just a quick demo of what this looks like. We'll go ahead and ask, what Coupa approvals are pending, and we can see what kind of response we get back. So of course, this is Copilot, so the response is going to be probably a little bit different than what we shared in that initial user experience slide. But in this case, you can see it's breaking it down by user and is giving us sort of a summary of the of a couple of pending approvals for these users. So before we go to the Q&A session for this use case, I'm going to, again, share a couple of resources for those who are just onboarding to using Creator Studio or are looking to build a similar use case. The first resource will be the Creator Studio Developer Certification course. You can find this on our Moveworks Academy. This is your training resource that we provide for all things Moveworks. But specifically, the Creator Studio Developer Certification course is going to walk you through setting up some example use cases, provide training modules, and then ultimately give you a multiple choice exam through which you can get a LinkedIn certification to share with your coworkers on LinkedIn, which is kind of fun. In addition, we have our documentation and developer community. The documentation portal you can think of as your Moveworks reference material. So any question you have about Moveworks skills, functionality, including Creator Studio, I would highly recommend starting with the documentation portal. Especially, I want to call out these tutorials and guides. These are going to be documentation on how to actually set up connectors, how to build use cases that we've seen successful at other customers and companies. Really, really useful resource. And then finally, again, our developer community. Now, this is a forum, so you can go here and ask any kinds of questions about potential use case design, maybe understanding how other customers have done rollouts, and then you can get feedback and responses from, again, other customers, but as well as product managers, Moveworks internal folks like myself. All sorts of people are going to be in that community, so a really good resource to reach out to. And with that, we'll go to the Q&A, a little bit of a fast session today. So let's go ahead and see if we have any questions. Okay, so Jared, I see you've asked the question, instead of needing user ingestion, is it possible to have Moveworks query the user based on their email to identify their Coupa user ID? So that's a very good question. Yes, you can, but today that will require an iPaaS solution. So the way that would work is instead of making the API call directly to Coupa, you would make that API call instead to probably like again, like an iPaaS workflow or some middle layer that you've built, which will take in the email, make that call, then be able to take the ID that comes back to then make the query. Coupa actually doesn't allow for you to search for approvals through the API via email, as far as I can tell. So I think you have to use the ID. That said, again, I think you're going to really enjoy next week's session because Agentic does allow for that kind of automation. So starting next week, we can talk about how you would actually build that using just Moveworks. To give you a sort of a brief overview of what that would look like, instead of calling an iPaaS tool, you would construct or teach the bot how to use a couple of different API calls. So one would be to get the actual user by user email from Coupa, and then it can then string that into the next API call, which would be to actually get the approval notification. So again, Jared, I think you're going to enjoy next week's session. In fact, let me see. I'm going to allow you to talk, but just if you have any other questions, I just want to make sure I've answered your question.
Yeah, you answered it. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, no problem, Jared.
Do you have the link to that, the one next week you mentioned?
Yeah, I can get you that real quick. Let me find that here.
Thank you.
No, that's it. Yeah, you're welcome, Jared. I probably need to start just including the links to the next sessions anyway, I guess, in these. It's a good idea. Over 16th session. Yeah, I see we've released a bunch of new sessions as well, so you can sign up for those here as well. Let's see. I wish we had the option to have a chat, a proper chat in this Zoom call. Let me instead, let me share my screen and I'll show you where to find this. It's right here. Okay. So you would have probably used this page also when you were signing up for this webinar originally. We keep this up to date. So excuse me. This is where I would recommend going to sign up for really any webinar, but especially next week's Building on Moveworks, the new Agentic Automation Engine session. Just select 16th and you can sign up for that.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so I think we are good to go ahead and close things up today. Again, very fast session, so I appreciate the time that you guys have given us. But if you do have any other questions, I'll create a community post here in a minute, and we can follow up with questions and whatnot there. I'll also include a link to the other community webinars that are coming up. So with that, have a great weekend. Keep an eye out for that community post, and we will catch you guys next week.